So, JJK 235 has finally dropped in English, and we finally have an end to our battle between Sukuna and Gojo, and thank God it's over. Yes, the ending of this fight sucks, but it's finally over. I'm well aware that there was a huge ass hype behind this fight, but it's finally over, and that's important. But before we really get into the meat of this, and there's a lot of meat to get into, I think that it'd be nice if you guys would subscribe to the channel so I can always bring more anime videos to you. Hopefully not as angry as this one in the future. And a like if you happen to like the content. This latest issue of JJK was by far and away controversial, would be a mild statement. It kind of was the equivalent of lighting a Molotov cocktail in an oil refinery on top of a mountain made of dynamite. It's just a volatile situation that Gege has just handed off to us now and we get to talk about. So, if you're not caught up on this, this appears to be the final end of the battle between Gojo and Sukuna. Now, this battle has been going for, I'd say weeks, but honestly I think it's months at this point. And there's been a lot of back and forth that hasn't really amounted to anything. So, when this fight finally looked like it was over last week, we had a big split in the JJK community in terms of whether it was actually over or whether we were going to get one more continuation this week that was going to flip the paradigm. Neither of those happened this time. We actually ended up with a different winner of the fight than what we thought, which of course is the fact that Sukuna won. Sukuna straight up won, and he freaking killed Gojo, and we're all pissed about that. But also, it happened off screen. I don't even know how to... It's a manga. It's a visual source of media. It happened off screen. I'm a little pissed. But even more than that, the way that this chapter was constructed is such an unsatisfying ending to a fight in a series known for its satisfying fights that it leaves a lot to go into. So, we're going to try and take this step by step, what happened, what we can expect in the future, and what this means for the series as a whole. Okay, so, this chapter starts really weird, because it actually starts with Gojo waking up in an airport terminal. Gojo wakes up, he sees Gato, and it's a friendly interaction. One of the interesting things here is that Gojo does not wake up as his adult self. He wakes up as he was in Hidden Inventory, as a teenager. And as he wakes up, he has, honestly, a really heartfelt conversation with Gato. I think this was really touching. And it eventually incorporates other characters that we know, with Haibara and Nanami, and even referencing the principal. It's really sweet. It talks a lot about how the fight went for him, the feeling he had of not being alone, how he related to how Sukuna must feel alone. Not the first time that's been brought up, but that's a conversation for later in the video. And it's really just about him coming to terms with the fact that he lost and he's now dead. He's been unalived. It's an odd way to convey this information to us, but it's not the worst. We've kind of seen this done before in the series, and it's sweet and heartfelt there. So, there's some wiggle room with this. Of course, it ends up with him basically saying that he really hopes that this is what the afterlife looks like for him, because he's so happy to be with everyone. And that is in and of itself an interesting thing, because there's something about this that leads me to believe that this is real and not just a delusion. Because when he's having this conversation with these multiple characters, one of the things that gets brought up is that Nanami says that Mei told him something about whether he should go north or south, whether he wanted to reinvent himself or return to a previous version of himself. Obviously, he always wanted to move to Malaysia, which is south in Japan, so he would return to being as he was as a teenager, and then ultimately decided to support the future with, Yuji. But what's interesting here is that as that information is conveyed, that's not something that Gojo even references, being like, oh, you told me that once, or anything like that. And some of the other things here really lead me to believe that Gojo is probably actually in the version of the afterlife. We know that, in JJK there is an afterlife. Jogo references this, saying that they linger on after death, that there's reflections for that for them. So, in terms of what happened to him after this, I think it's kind of sweet. I do think it's very funny that if this is indeed the afterlife as well, which makes some sense. I think it's really funny Toji's there. Nobody's ever talked about this, but Toji's in the background of one of these shots in the airport. He's actually behind Riko and Koroi when they're at the table together. Um, it's a sweet ending, and honestly, if the rest of this wasn't so infuriating, it probably would have been a nice send-off. It's not. Now let's move on. So, when you think the ending to such a sweet scene should come about in the next page, you probably think maybe we'll check in with some of the other students, maybe we'll check in with Kenjaku because he's the puppet master behind all this. Nope. First thing we get to see is a bisected Gojo. Why? Not only was the off-screen death incredibly infuriating, you literally showed everyone's favorite character cut in half. Off-screen. Like, you didn't get to see this in battle, it happened off-screen. It's incredibly irritating. Made even more irritating by the fact that no matter what way you slice it, the explanation for how this happened is awful. Because essentially now we get to go into Sukuna explaining how he bypassed infinity, and basically explaining that he had Maharaga adapt to, Gojo's infinite technique, and basically come around to figuring out how to... I've heard some YouTubers explain it as cutting behind and in front, therefore if it's not targeting him, it doesn't matter. And that's how he was able to get past and basically win the fight. I'm going to come back to that too, but that's not how that works. Number 3 is that we got our lineup now, because basically we got to see everyone grieving at the fact that Gojo is now gone. And we find out that the next opponent for Sukuna will be Kashimo. I like Kashimo. He seems pretty cool. He was only introduced 60 chapters ago, but he seems pretty cool. My investment in this fight is null. Kind of like it was for Shinjuku Showdown as a total, but it's more null now than it was before. And that's kind of where it leaves us. It leaves us with this idea for what we're going to get for a fight in the coming chapters. So, a couple of notes. So, in this chapter, we're finally bringing to an end a battle that was built up for literal years. This battle had been built up since early JJK. And we bring this battle to a close after weeks of its own internal fight. I mean, like, not only did this battle have massive precipitation in terms of what was going to happen, like, people were constantly going back and forth on who would win, whose technique was stronger, what Sukuna might have his sleeve, what Gojo could do, and then it took actual weeks for this battle. This battle was not like a 3 to 4 week battle like we usually see in JJK. This thing had to have been, I will have to go back and check, it was like 4 months of this fight with absolutely nothing else to break it up. That's a little irritating, because essentially Gege made us have to sit down and watch this fight. And I'm not going to say that the idea of these two characters not fighting wouldn't be cool, but I am going to say it doesn't really fit this series. It doesn't fit its tone, it doesn't fit its power structure. It's the equivalent of watching like My Hero and then all of a sudden it becomes a kaiju battle. It does not really equate to the power system, to the structure, to the writing style that we have seen. And it sucked, because most people are very unhappy with the fact that Gojo won. Oh wait, no he didn't. Sukuna won. That's a problem. See, if Gojo had won, a lot of people were wondering, well, what would be the next plan, because, he would just kind of steamroll, Kenjaku. So some people were wondering, like, well, maybe he'll win, but he'll be too injured, so it'll have to be up to the next generation. Nope, that's not what we got. And here's the problem. It fundamentally requires that for this battle now was basically a prelim to somebody else fighting, Sukuna, and he's not going to win either. I'm calling it right now. Kashimo is not even going to win. I don't even know if he's going to last a chapter, and that might actually end up being a joke. But even if he does last more than a chapter, there's a lot of stuff that could have been done in this time period when they were all just sitting around, and they didn't do jack. So now, we're left in a situation where the strongest sorcerer is gone. I don't think any of them genuinely thought they would ever be able to hit the same height as Satoru Gojo, except for maybe Yuta. And they all kind of needed to be, but they're not. So we're left with this kind of thing that, like, if the good guys win, which there is a theory that they won't, but I'll get to that in a second, it will be very, very costly and very, very much by the skin of their teeth. That's not really satisfying, is it? And it kind of ties into the whole explanation for why this fight ended the way that it did. See, we're given the explanation that Riem and Sukuna basically took out Gojo by using the Maharaga's adaptation, and it showed him how to cut around infinity. You can't cut around infinity. It is infinite. There's not like a section, it's not like a tarp that you can peel away. It's infinite. And even more importantly than that, we're given this explanation in the way that it's just kind of supposed to be a justification for how it happened so fast off screen. But that's not how that works. Remember as well, technically, that the tech. I love this idea that a lot of people justify this as saying that, well, Gojo's technique targets himself and only targets things that it considers dangerous. Yes, but remember, that has to include things Gojo can't see or understand. Because he's even talking in Hidden Inventory about the fact that it could be linked to things like poisons. He could resist that if he trained it well enough. I really don't think this was a good explanation, because if it could detect poisons, it sure as heck can detect a giant slash coming his way and would perceive that as dangerous. So that is a terrible, terrible excuse for how he got around that. And it ultimately just leaves us unsatisfied. Now, okay, so now we're going to get, what, 2 or 3 battles now against Riem and Sukuna, where a bunch of different sorcerers are going to take turns trying to beat him. And, maybe they die, maybe they'll jump in on each other to try and help out, who knows. That is just so unappealing as a concept at this point, and so goes against a lot of what we've built up towards with a lot of JJK about self upgrading, about, training your own abilities, and about working with others, which has been a reoccurring theme in JJK. This goes against that entirely. So, will Kashima win this fight? No, because a lot of people are pulling for it. It has to be somebody from the school to do it. That having been said, it does feel like a bit of a gay move to go ahead and have a character that he introduced only 60 chapters ago just one-off Sukuna. It does feel like something he would do. That's not a compliment. So, with that in mind, where does this leave us in the future? The future of JJK is uncertain, because as a lot of people like to bring up, there's an old tweet or post from Gege where he said that either one would die or all 4 would die, referencing that either all 4 of the main characters in JJK would have to die, or they would have to kill Sukuna. Well, that number isn't going very well right now, is it? So that's a big justification for why a lot of people think this isn't going to end well. And then on the flip side, it is a shonen manga. And because it's a shonen manga, there is more of a likelihood that we will get some measure of a satisfying ending. And a lot of people are pulling for the fact that this was actually used as a tool to make us hate Sukuna more, so we will be more engaged with the ending of JJK. I don't think it was a good move. I don't think it was well executed for the amount of stuff that this basically made us have to slog through. And it was a slog looking back at it. I don't think it was worth it. I kind of wish he'd just stayed in the prison realm. It would have been so much better. Like, he got out after the whole thing, and maybe he saw how far his students had come. But for this, it wasn't worth it. And does that mean that in the future we're going to look at a satisfying, like, the heroes will still win, but it'll be a little bittersweet? Does it mean that the bad guys will win, which I don't think is what's going to happen, but, it could. I know a lot of people I've seen recently, people have used both Game of Thrones, and one of the other ones that comes to my mind with this is Attack on Titan. And just a strong reminder, those both had really bad endings. So let's hope Gege can stick a better landing than both of those, because, oh boy, those did not go over well in their endings, and they were poorly executed in a variety of ways. I don't think JJK is going to go that route. I do think it will have some semblance of a good ending, but just in terms of what's going to happen, I don't know at this point. there's so much different that I thought would have happened, and at this point, what I'm just gonna say is I miss the culling games. All right.